Our theme for Rally Day is Micah 6:8. Great piece of scripture. Kind of like, I try to give people things that they can use, like resources for them. That's a great scripture, Micah 6:8. He's showing you, oh man, who's good. What does the Lord require of you but to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God? Great passage. Today, we want to focus on our mission, and that's really, Micah 6:8 is what our mission is about. We used to have a motto in the United Church of Christ. It was, join us in the struggle for justice and peace. And that's really what Micah is saying today in this passage. Join me in the struggle for doing the right thing, for kindness, for loving kindness. And he wanted to put that thought in the mind of the people that he spoke to. So now I've got a question for you. We're trying to do all this interactive stuff today. And so these are three Southern gentlemen. Okay? Anybody name these three guys? Huh? Roy Orbison with the glasses and Elvis Presley. All right. Good. We got the three guys here today. I wanted to put in your mind the main theme of Micah 6:8. And these guys all spoke Twanglish. You know what Twanglish is? It's kind of like abbreviations of the real thing. And so these guys, I think about Roy Orbison in the song Pretty Woman. He has that word, mercy. Remember that? Mercy. Remember when he says that? You know where that came from? I was on NPR this last week. And they used to rehearse. All three of these guys used to rehearse. And as a Southern gentleman, you try not to swear, So there's this phrase, Lord have mercy, right? And so they would always say, when they were in the studio all day playing, and the producers and the people that made the records wanted them to keep going, they would say, mercy. As if to say, let us out of here. We've already had enough today. Mercy. That's the message of Micah. And I want you to remember it that way. Mercy. Something we cry out. It's kind of like saying, God bless you. It's kind of like saying, say uncle. Remember that old say uncle? It says mercy. Mercy. Micah is a modern day Marvin Gaye. Mercy, mercy me. Things ain't the way they used to be. See? Doug, you probably did that, right? You ever done that song?
Never tried that.
Huh?
Never tried that.
You never tried it? No. Yeah, okay. We're going to work on that. Mercy, mercy, things ain't the way they used to be. Think about that when you think about Micah. Joe was dying. For years he'd been at odds with his friend Bill. He used to be his best friend. He wanted to straighten things out, and he sent word to Bill to come and see him. When Bill arrived, Joe told him he was afraid to go into eternity with such bad feelings that are between them. So reluctantly and with great effort, Joe apologized for things he'd said, things he had done, and he assured Bill that he forgave him for his offenses. And everything was fine. Bill turned to go. And as he walked out of the room, Joe called out after him, just remember, if I get better, this doesn't count. Simon Peter came up to Jesus and he said, Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother or sister who sins against me? 7 times? Peter knew his religion, because that was the rule of the day. You got to forgive 7 times. And Jesus said, I tell you, not 7 times, but 77 times. And that probably meant forever. Micah 6:8. To do mercy, to love, to do justice, and to love kindness. Micah talked about justice. He talked about that Hebrew word hesed, which is the word for kindness, which really means something like mercy, love, loyalty, faithfulness, working for justice and peace in your own heart and in the world. And we can ask ourselves, what was it that caused the prophet Micah to We might be able to say that it was some event in history. Some terrible thing had been going on in the life of his nation. Some terrible thing had happened to them, and he was trying to comfort them or encourage them. But the real source of all of these good words is God. And we say that God sent Micah to Jerusalem and to us through this word to speak a word of truth. God spoke through Micah. I want to impress upon you how important this word hesed is in Hebrew. It means mercy. I am a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love, the Lord said to Moses. That phrase, a God of mercy and gracious, is repeated over and over again in Psalms, throughout the prophets. It's the theme of the Old Testament, a gracious God. We have great stories from Jesus. And Jesus has the Beatitudes, those first 5 sayings in Matthew 5. He said, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be satisfied." And he also said, "Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy." Now, Jesus pointed out that in his time, the most righteous people, the ones who hunger and thirst for righteousness, as in the parable of the Good Samaritan, were the ones who often didn't do justice. And so he always tied these two things together, as he did in the Beatitudes. He preached a gospel of justice and fairness. A lot of times we'll hear people say things about biblical truth in an unmerciful way. We'll hear people pull something out of the Old Testament to deny someone justice or benefits. And so when that happens, we have these resources, and we can say, if you want to talk about biblical truth, let's talk about the life and teachings of Jesus. Let's talk about Paul and his insistence on grace. Let's talk about Micah 6:8, to do justice and to love kindness. Now, we go on a lot of mission trips here in Trinity, and I'm not exactly sure what's happening in this picture. But this was a trip that we took to San Diego, and one of the things they had us do was these buildings were places where people lived who were transitioning from homelessness and pulling basically weeds out of the cracks so they could refinish. Today, during our time of fellowship below, we're going to have baskets available on the tables, and they're filled with items that help us to remember the missions that we have been on in the life of our church. And those mission trips are always about justice, they're always about mercy, and they're always about humility. Because anytime we go and we meet people, anytime we go to an Indian reservation or we go to Mexico, those of us who've been on recovery groups, we know that we're there to connect with people. And it's about the relationship and not about our knowing something that they don't know or our being in a superior position. It's the humility of knowing someone who's fallen on hard times. So here's my next question. Anybody know who this guy is? How many of you know who this guy is? Put your hands up. You know who this guy is? Huh? What?
Adam Smith.
John Smith.
Adam.
Adam Smith. No. John Adams. The Max, and what president was he? He was the second president, first vice president, right? Advocate for abolition of slavery. John Adams was sent a letter by his granddaughter Caroline, and he wrote this response back to her because she was questioning some of the terrible inequalities in the world in which she lived. And John Adams' advice to his granddaughter was this: The longer I live, the more I read, the more patiently I think, and the more anxiously I inquire, the less I seem to know. Do justice, love mercy, walk humbly. That's enough. So questions, and so answers your affectionate grandfather. John Evans quoted Micah 6:8 when he wanted to pass on advice to his granddaughter. C.S. Lewis lived an anxious life, and he felt that it went back to a time when one of his teachers humiliated him when he was a boy, and he couldn't forgive his teacher. And later in life, he began to read the teachings of Jesus, and he realized that one of the things that he had to do to move on and to have the kind of life that he wanted to live was to forgive that teacher if he was going to be able to move on. He said every time he tried to be merciful to his teacher, he couldn't do it. He was so bitter. So finally, he resolved to just say the words, "I forgive you," every single day, whether he felt like it or not. He would just say the words, "I forgive you." And then something spiritual began to happen to him. He said, each time I said those words, another brick was removed from my wall of bitterness. I had built that wall, but one day I came to realize that that wall was no longer there. We worship, we learn good words to take away the wall of bitterness, to help us to move on. Facebook's a wonderful thing, and you see all sorts of neat stuff in it. This is one of the posts I recently saw by an educator and a counselor named L.R. Noss down in the bottom right corner. I thought it was a great quote. It's not our job to toughen our children up to face a cruel and heartless world. It's our job to raise children who will make the world a little less cruel and heartless. What if we apply that to ourselves and to our faith? It's not the task for us to toughen ourselves up to face a cruel and heartless world, but it's up to us to make the world a little less cruel and heartless. Not to prepare ourselves for isolation, to figure out ways that we can stay away from all sorts of folks, but find ways like mission trips, like worship in the church, ways to connect with people that otherwise we wouldn't have known, and to make the world more compassionate. We wonder about the church in our age and all the changes that go on around us. And we know that much of it is because people have become isolated from one another. They've begun to fear real connection. And there's a lack of connection. L.R. Noss also said this: no matter the problem, kindness is always the right response. That resonates with the kinds of things that Micah said. And most often, you know what, there isn't anything we can do about the bad things that happen to us. Some of us might think that we're impervious. Some of us might think that if we just do the right things, nothing bad's going to happen. But you know what? There isn't anything we can do about the bad things that happen to us. All the people that we visited on all those mission trips, bad things have happened to them. And we had it within our power to make a connection. We had it in our power to show mercy. We have no control over illnesses. We have no control over people around us who are very anxious. Sometimes we have no power over many social ills. But Micah reminds us that we can respond with kindness and fairness. He's shown you, O mortal, what is good. What does the Lord require of you? To do justice, to love kindness, to walk humbly with your God. Mercy. I'm getting into the 1-minute rap. Remember the 1-minute rap we're into? Okay, here we go. Why did Micah go to Jerusalem? He went to Jerusalem because he lived in a cruel and heartless world. Maybe some bad thing happened in Israel. Maybe Israel was guilty of some terrible injustice. Maybe they needed to hear these words. But the bottom line is that Micah had a call, a sense that God was calling him to speak words of truth and comfort. A call and the truth that I believe you hear today. And in all our ways, we continue the mission of our merciful friend Jesus, who is the real source of all good words. Micah speaks to us every time we lose our way. When we ask the question, what's really important in life? What does God require of us? What does God call us to do with this life that we've been given? And God spoke clearly through the prophet Micah. He's shown you, O mortal, what is good. What does the Lord require of you? But to do justice, and to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God. Loud and clear mercy.